Dear students of class 8A and 8B, today the lesson number 2, I am going to re-explain as per the following points mentioned in the board. The first one, industrial age in Britain. The expansion of trade in the 17th and 18th centuries forced European manufacturers to produce goods to improve the way they produce goods. As a result, an economic revolution started in England around 1750. This came to be called the Industrial Revolution. Second point, Industrial Agricultural Revolution. The rich people of England, they invested a huge amount of money for making themselves more and more benefited. They started purchasing the lands not only in the cities but at the same time lands of the villages. They reached villages also with their goods, with their machines, and started a revolution, industrial revolution in villages also. The people living in the villages and were working in the agricultural lands, now they all became jobless people because lands used as agriculture, these all were sold to the rich people of England by the landowners. Now, what was the intention of the landowners, intention of the money makers or money investors? Those who invested money and purchased their lands, they realized that lands of villages should be more and more economic than the lands of cities. So, the lands of the villages should be purchased at a very low price, low cost. And hence, they started purchasing lands of the villages. As a result of it, the merchants began to move towards the villages. These kind of merchants who invested money, they began to move towards the villages, bringing with them their raw materials and capital. And those who were earning money from the agricultural lands, they all became jobless people. Now what happened to them? Finally, they started looking for jobs and they left their villages, came to the cities, and families who were engaged, employed in using skills to produce finished goods, they also were benefited with that system because the families of agricultural laborers, they left their villages in search of jobs, and while living in cities, they engaged themselves in producing goods meant for trade and not for self-consumption. So this was the major steps, the coming of the industrial age in Britain. Next one, causes of industrial revolution. There are certain causes of the industrial revolution. Number one, inventions. A number of machines were invented by by the scientists. They contributed a lot for the all-round development in the country. A number of machines machines were invented by them. In the new system, the invention of new machines such as spinning jenny, such as power loom, resulted in an increase in the production. Which production? Production of textiles. The hand-powered spinning jenny was patented by James Hargreaves in the year 1770. And development of spinning wheel into the spinning jenny was a significant factor in factory industry, significant factor in the industrialization of textile industry. And other inventions also led to the agricultural growth throughout Europe. That wave first came in England and scattered in other parts of Europe in course of time. Next point, availability of natural resources. Availability of natural resources. You know, a number of factors led to the availability of natural resources in England. Why? Because England was a place of geographical interest. England was a place full of natural resources and raw materials. And hence, so many scientists were encouraged, so many money lenders invested their money, so many rich people made themselves richer only because of using the raw materials, the natural resources of their country, England. And it is due to that reason England became a famous center for industrial revolution. As a result of, trade, an enormous amount of, wealth accumulated in England, only in England, and a large part of this was spent on inventing new machines and the imperial products that improved the production. Several new machines which were invented helped the revolutionary, side of machine-made industries. As a result of it, the easy availability of raw materials needed by industries like coal, like iron, also helped the growth of industry like iron and steel in North England. Besides, other factors also were there behind it that were coming up required an abundant supply of cheap labor. As I mentioned earlier, that villages also have become a center of industrial growth. Why? Because of agricultural revolution. What agricultural revolution? Because lands which were cultivated by the landowners before industrial revolution, these lands ultimately were sold by them to the rich people of England. Now rich people purchased their lands, and by using the new invented machines, they started cultivation. As a result of it, they started cultivating different types of crops, bulk in quantity, but by saving money and by saving time. Because instead of manual labor, machines started working there. Machines started, harvesting, and in every step, machines started working instead of people. That's why the people who were agricultural laborers, they all became jobless, and they had to leave their villages in search of occupation. So they reached cities, and it resulted in birth of cheap labor, which the factory owners of cities required. So they them as you know appointed them as labor in their factories and industries, and utilized them properly. They started producing goods bulk in quantities at the cost of these cheap laborers, and they were paid very low wages, but still they had to work there because of the reason of requirement of money. And another point that is important, that is, creation of capital. Creation of capital. Capital also had become a factor. The capitalist invested money in order to be benefited during industrial revolution, during industrial era. Apart from this, the industrial revolution created two classes in the society. In my previous class I discussed the industrialized who owned the factories and tools, and the workers who were completely dependent on the industrialists. This was the beginning of the capitalism, a system where the means of its production, like land, mines, factories, these were owned privately by individuals. And this effect came through the process of efficient means of transport, because efficient means of transport enabled them to earn much more amount of money. The developments of more efficient means of transport and the communication was crucial for industrial growth, industrial development. Great advances were made in the railways in England, and afterwards that idea was followed. These ideas were followed by other European countries. The Industrial Revolution led to the search for overseas colonies as sources of cheaper raw materials and markets for finished products, finished goods. This led to the growth of colonialism. The idea first came to England. England started establishing their colonies over Asia, Europe, and Africa, only because of the interest of their industrial growth and development. Next point, science in industry. Science in industry. Scientific development in industry also led to the growth and development of industrial revolution. Why? Because invention of a number of machines by different scientists also encouraged the mill owners to increase their factories and industries throughout England, and hence the production and the scientific improvement also helped them to produce bulk quantities of goods through machines. And in course of time, it also led to the rapid production of goods by machines. And this growth and development also led to the rapid unplanned growth of cities, because many people from rural areas moved to the cities in search of jobs, as I mentioned earlier. And it provided by the factories there. Gradually, the cities became overcrowded, overpopulated, and diseases and epidemics, communicative diseases and epidemic became common. But there was no solution. There was no health facilities, I also mentioned it. So these are the important factors also led to the growth and development of industrial era. But there are some drawbacks, because in spite of being invented, in spite of being a part of industrial revolution, the scientists were unable to invent new medicines in order to protect the lives of the common people. They kept on inventing only machines under the inspiration of the factory owners, money makers, capitalists, and hence they did not have time to invent medicines for the health of factory workers or laborers. Next point, introduction of the factory system. Introduction of the factory system. The new machines which were invented by the scientists. These were very large in sizes, very big sizes, but it was very hard to install in a very small rooms. That's why the idea of setting up factories and industries came to their mind. They decided to install it in a large rooms of big sizes. They got constructed and installed the newly invented machines there. As a result of it, the idea of setting up factory system came to their mind, and by this way, a number of factories and industries were established throughout England. A number of important cities also became a part of industrial cities like Liverpool, Manchester, and so on. And it also became a part of textile industry. A number of textile factories and industries, textile factories were established there. And these new factories and industries that were coming up required an abundant supply of cheap labor. Apart from this, the people who were living in the villages, they migrated to the cities and towns. Why? I mentioned in the beginning, in search of jobs. And these workers had been, working there in the villages, as agricultural labor. Now they all became factory labor, and cheap labor, and paid very low wages. But these jobs traditionally done by agricultural workers. Those who are agricultural workers, by losing their jobs in villages because of the new class people of England who invested their money in purchasing lands from villages, so these agricultural workers turned into factory workers and were paid very low wages. So these are the important factors of the these were the important causes the industrial revolution took place. The industrial revolution became more and more a relevant factor throughout England only because of the money lenders, only because of the only because of the advantages of the country. They were benefited, but the people who were living under poverty line, their life had become very miserable at the cost of them. Rich people were benefited. Although finished products flooded the large market of their colonies, England established, yet the agricultural, yet the factory workers who were facing a lot of problem, who were providing manual labor, providing help, who are providing hard labor as factory workers in factories and industries. They had no other facilities because their wages only for which they started working there were very less. They were less paid. That's why their life had become miserable. But during industrial revolution, some ideas also gave, it resulted in some development, some growth, some progress throughout England. Some ideas, some concept also, it gave birth of some concepts, some ideas, the idea of urbanization, the idea of capitalism, and this impact of this wave also came to our country, India, because India also had become the colony of Britain. They utilize it. They fully utilize Indian resources, Indian raw materials. As a result of it, Indian handicraft industry was ruined, and instead of handicraft industry, large-scale industry occupied the market of the needy people. They lost their jobs. As a result of it, they were forced to work in large-scale industries. And the finished goods, which were produced from factories and industries, flooded the large market of India, and money lenders, money investors, money makers, capitalists, rich people, they all were benefited with it. Ultimately, during industrial revolution, England became a rich and prosperous country throughout the whole world. Up to this, my dear students. Thank you.